5 here with a Type 99 Arasaka. Let's shoot a watermelon.
November 1937. A cold wind moves through the narrow streets of Nanjing, rattling broken shutters and carrying with it the distant echo of rifle fire. I imagine the scene as if I were there myself. Lamplight flickering against damp stone walls, Japanese officers hunched over crude maps, boots still muddy from the day's advance. Yet despite their confidence, despite their overwhelming numbers, sleep does not come easily that night. Not because of enemy artillery, not because of an ambush already underway, but because of a rifle, one whose reputation had begun to crawl into the mind like a slow, poisonous whisper. I have spent years studying weapons of war, and I can tell you this with certainty. Some arms kill with brute force, others with precision, but a rare few terrorize long before the trigger is pulled. This was one of those weapons, a Japanese rifle so unsettling in its design, in its use, and in the myths that grew around it, that even trained officers slept lightly, hands never far from their pistols, ears straining at every sound in the dark. At first, the stories sounded exaggerated. Soldiers always exaggerate. Yet the more primary accounts I read, the more field reports I uncovered, the clearer it became that this fear was very real. I began to trace the origin of that fear back not to superstition, but to steel, wood, and a very specific philosophy of war. The mystery begins earlier, in the early years of the 20th century, when Japan was racing to modernize its military. The Russo-Japanese War had proven that discipline and industrial ambition could topple empires, but it had also exposed weaknesses. Japanese infantry rifles were reliable, yes, but commanders wanted something more, something that could dominate not just battlefields, but minds. The problem Japan faced was brutally simple. Its soldiers were often smaller in stature than their Western counterparts. They fought in dense terrain, jungles, cities, mountains, where visibility was poor and engagements were sudden. They needed a rifle that could serve not only as a firearm, but as an extension of the soldier's will. A weapon that would work flawlessly in mud, rain, and blood. And if it unnerved the enemy in the process, all the better. This is where the Arasaka lineage enters the story, culminating in the rifle that earned its disturbing reputation, the Type 38, and its later, more infamous sibling, the Type 99. I remember the first time I held an original Type 99 in a museum archive. It felt deceptively ordinary. Long wooden stock, bolt-action mechanism, iron sights. But as I examined it closer, the reasons for its psychological impact became unmistakable. The rifle was chambered in 7.7 by 58 millimeters, a powerful cartridge comparable to the British .303. When fired, it produced a sharp, cracking report that echoed unnaturally in enclosed spaces. Officers reported that the sound alone, especially during night engagements, made it difficult to determine how many rifles were firing. A single Japanese marksman could sound like a platoon. Then there was the bayonet. Japanese doctrine insisted that the rifle was incomplete without it. The Type 30 bayonet, often fixed permanently, turned the rifle into a spear nearly as tall as the man carrying it. In close quarters, in dark corridors or jungle paths, this transformed the weapon into something primal. Accounts from Chinese and Allied officers describe silhouettes emerging from the fog, rifles extended, steel glinting, before a shot was ever fired. That image alone was enough to rob men of sleep. Technically, the rifle was overbuilt to a degree that surprised even modern engineers. The bolt was famously strong. So strong, in fact, that post-war tests showed it could withstand catastrophic overpressure that would destroy other rifles. Japanese designers favored durability over refinement. Dust covers rattled loudly when soldiers moved, a flaw on paper, but one that unintentionally contributed to its eerie presence. Officers wrote of hearing metallic clicks in the dark, unsure whether it was one man or many. Operational history only deepened the legend. In China, Japanese infantry used the rifle with ruthless efficiency. Snipers equipped with scoped versions, particularly the Type 97 sniper rifle, were trained not just to kill, but to harass. They targeted officers deliberately. A single shot, clean and distant, followed by hours of silence. No follow-up fire, no movement, just waiting. I read one Chinese officer's diary entry from 1938 that still chills me. He wrote that after sunset, men refused to light cigarettes. Orders were whispered. Boots were removed. The Japanese rifle watches, he wrote. It waits for rank. The psychological effect carried into the Pacific War. On Guadalcanal in 1942, American officers reported similar experiences. The jungle amplified every sound. Japanese rifles fired from concealed positions, often elevated, creating the illusion of unseen observers everywhere. Sleep deprivation became a weapon in itself. Men slept in shifts. Helmets stayed on. Hands cramped around sidearms. Comparisons with Allied rifles reveal why this fear was unique. The American M1 Garand was faster, louder, more technologically advanced, but it announced itself. The British Lee Enfield was rapid and accurate, but familiar. The Japanese rifle, by contrast, was alien. Its long profile, fixed bayonet, and relentless reliability gave it an almost ritualistic presence. It was not just a tool, it was a symbol of a doctrine that embraced death without hesitation. Even Japanese soldiers were affected. Training emphasized absolute obedience and spiritual readiness. Recruits were taught that their rifle was their soul. Losing it was worse than death. This belief bled into how the weapon was used. There are recorded instances of soldiers continuing to fight with shattered stocks, bent bolts, blood-soaked actions, rifles that by all logic should have failed, but did not. As a historian, I am cautious with words like fear and terror. Yet when multiple sides, across different fronts, describe the same sleepless nights, the same creeping paranoia, patterns emerge. The disturbing nature of this rifle was not in a single feature, but in the sum of its parts: sound, silhouette, doctrine, and myth reinforcing one another. By the war's end, many of these rifles were discarded, captured, or melted down. Yet their legacy lingered. Veterans spoke of them decades later, voices lowering when the subject arose, not because the rifle was superior in every measurable way, but because it had succeeded in becoming more than metal and wood. When I close my eyes and return to that November night in 1937, I no longer see just officers around a map. I see the long shadow of a rifle leaning against a wall, silent, patient, waiting, and I understand why sleep was impossible.